Hello, Simone. Today we are going to have a spicy conversation
Ooh.
because Pakistan did the unthinkable, or rather something that should be non-controversial, which is banning child marriages.
Oh, God.
The country's primary religious authority, called the Council of Islamic Theology, got
I'm
together.
picturing like a rounded table with a big globe icon.
Oh no, what really happened was this.
This is all wrong. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams. People are suffering.
And Greta Thunberg, of course, famous anti-Semite, would get along great with these people. But they basically came back and they said this is Islamophobic, is the term that has been used. It is against the principles of Islam.
Wait, does Islam actually condone?
Well, yeah. So I was like, I know there's the whole, if you're on the internet and you're around the anti-Islamic circles, oh, well, he did, get engaged to a girl when she was 6 and consummate the marriage when she was 9. This is Aisha.
No.
And I'd heard this, and then I'd heard Muslims say, oh no, that's not true. Look at the actual whatever. And so I just assumed, angry internet atheists being nerds, right? I was like, yeah, right. Come on, that's not real. Or I'm sure that there's nuance if you really dig into it. Then,
well, maybe it's one of those things where people just kind of forget their ages. So then you ask them how old they are and they're like, I don't know, 9.
Well, so we are going to get into the evidence for both sides of this.
Okay.
But what I will say, what I didn't know, is that in the conservative Muslim world, if you're not in the West, almost everyone believes the 9 age. This Islamic Council most certainly would believe the 9 age. Almost every major conservative Islamic council, or I'd say every major conservative Islamic council, particularly the Sunni ones, would go with the 9 age.
Does this mean that in turn it is considered normative or possibly even recommended that girls as young as 9 get married?
Yes, puberty is seen as the age.
Puberty is getting earlier and earlier these days, so that's, I guess, 9 territory.
Let's go into the data here because there's a lot to go over with this case, and I think it's really, really interesting. We're also going to go into some unique practices in Pakistan where they trade young girls to end blood feuds with other families. So they will take, their 9-year-old daughter or whatever, and basically give them to another family for marriage for one of their
family with which they have a blood feud.
Yes. So
this kind of reminds me of how Alexander the Great was raised in an antagonistic court, right? As I
don't think that I assume that in a lot of these cases they are pretty severely abused, but we will get into this.
Yeah, actually, I've listened to some very, very long interviews with women who've been in situations like these, so I'm not super ready for this, but let's go.
We won't get into too many horrific specifics, just generalities and things that have been caught by the public and stuff like that. Okay, so in May 2025, Pakistan's National Assembly and Senate passed the Islamabad Capital Territory Child Marriage Restraint Bill, a landmark legislation aimed at curbing child marriages by setting the minimum legal age for marriage to 18 for both males and females in Islamabad. The bill criminalized cohabitation with minors as statutory rape, with penalties of up to 7 years in prison and fines of at least 1 million Pakistani rupees, or around 2,600 pounds. However, the Council of Islamic Ideology, CII, a constitutional body, so again, this isn't some weirdo council, this is part of the constitutional body that advises the Pakistani government on the compatibility of its laws with Islamic principles, declared the bill, quote unquote, un-Islamic on May 27th, 2025. The CII argued that provisions defining marriage under 18 as child abuse and describing punishments were not within Islamic jurisdictions. They also noted that the bill was not sent to them for review before its passage. I find that very interesting that they assumed that it would have been. And apparently they had killed similar bills multiple times in the past.
Oh.
So they big mad about this. They argue,
check with them, the nerve.
Yeah, they argue that Islamic law does not set a specific minimum age for marriage, with some clerics suggesting that puberty, which can occur as early as 9, and with obviously the Prophet as precedent, literally 9 is considered okay for them, is sufficient for marriage eligibility. And I did ask AI, and AI said that your average Pakistani by far would believe that Aisha was 9. It's just sort of the Western ones who would think something different, or the ones who are involved in like online arguing with atheists. Historical context. This is not the first time the CIA has opposed child marriage bans. In 2014 and 2016, similar bills were deemed quote unquote un-Islamic and quote unquote blasphemous. Blasphemous, mind you, not just Islamophobic, leading to their withdrawal. The CIA has also made controversial rulings, such as suggesting DEI evidence is inadmissible in grape cases. Why? Do you just want grape to happen? Like,
I just don't think it's really seen as such. I mean, I just, in a lot of these, I mean, okay, and I'm pulling from interviews from Pakistani women who on YouTube have done like long form interviews of their experience growing up as child brides, essentially, like in houses of their in-laws. They're treated at like the level of worse than your average American would treat a pet dog.
That's what
in terms of like, and so like this idea that like you could, because I think even most people, and we've, bring it back, sexual relationship with a dog. Like, I think most people,
we're not pro that.
We're not pro that. What I'm saying is that even most Americans who do gross things with dogs by our standards do so with consensual dogs. But even the Pakistani young girls in these households are not given that standard, which is really screwed up.
So, sorry, I should note that what Simone is talking about here. 70% of people in the United States who engage in bestiality believe that the animal is consenting. Whether or not animals can consent is one of those things that I actually find to be pretty stupid. Like, obviously, like a dog, anyone
I feel
knows,
like if the dog's running away,
like the dog.
If you have to physically restrain an animal, or if the animal's running away, or if you are drugging the animal, there is probably not consent.
I can't believe that we're arguing for. I'm just trying to point out, like, to me, it seems ridiculous to be like dogs. I guess in the way that like a child can't consent, because a child could say that they want something that they don't actually want. So I think we need to put consent in multiple categories here, right? Like,
like if you put peanut butter on your junk and is it consent, or was just like they couldn't say no?
Is you could say the same about children, right? So I would. Sorry.
Well, you could say the same thing about the grooming gangs as well. Like those women were love bombed. Like they got into all of that.
Yeah, a lot of them get into it technically with consent. But
totally.
The point I'm making here, Simone, is if you consider dogs like children, but I don't think you should, because the reason why a child cannot meaningfully consent is because at a future time they will be at a higher intellectual development level.
That's true.
Where they
you can't expect that of a dog.
Something they made in the past. It's not that a child can't actively say I want something, right? This makes us look so bad. And later in this, I'm actually argue that I don't know if you should ban child brides.
Damn it, Malcolm.
So we're just gonna look so bad in this episode. And I would note here for anyone who wants to like take us out of context or something, like we are absolutely against bestiality. I think it is really not a good thing, but I tried to add a context there just to be like intellectually consistent in the way we're approaching.
We're trying to have an intellectual conversation here, which is unmoored from our personal proclivities and morality. We're just trying to be like weighing the calculus.
If either of us was actually into that, we would not be.
We'd probably not be openly talking about it.
No, not be talking about it. I'd be too scared that it would get out.
You know it. God.
And again, I want to be clear. We find this personally revolting and culturally revolting, but I have to call out the moral inconsistency of saying that an animal can't consent to this, but then we forcibly breed animals with other animals as a matter of due course and nobody cares, or we forcibly kill animals for their food, and obviously we don't care when they consent to that. The other thing that the council had registered before is that men do not need their wives' permission for a second marriage. That is hyper abusive.
No, but that's also hyper normalized.
Yeah, it was in Islamic law.
That happens all the time. Are you kidding me? Like, this is not surprise. This shouldn't be surprising to people.
Well, again, we've got to, well, at the end of this, we'll analyze this was in the cultural context of Islam, but let's keep going here, okay?
Yeah.
Some religious
also, though, I just want to say, though, like, whoa. It's actually really big that they're doing this, considering how normalized these things are. Like,
well, I
shots
see this
fired.
as
What's
sort
going
of
on?
a form of Western cultural imperialism.
That's what I'm assuming. The urban monoculture has taken over the political
No,
class.
the UN basically threatened them and said you have to do this. Well, we'll get into this.
Okay. Because
It's
I'm like,
probably not even
wait
gonna
a
be
second. Yeah, like this doesn't seem like politically representative of the voting population. So
No, it's not.
okay.
So even mainstream parties like the JUIF, the Jihad Islamophobic, has opposed the bill, with leader Mullen Falazar Raham announcing protests, claiming the law, quote, makes fornication easier, end quote. Here, basically, he's saying, look, we plan to have sex with these people anyway who are below X age. It's just, they now won't be our wives, right? We're still going to force, we're still going to
now you're forcing us to break Islamic law when before we were totally fine. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You're making sinners of us.
And within their cultural context, it is true. I mean, I think the way Islam treats women is abhorrent. And when I say Islam, I don't mean all Islam. I mean the majority of Islam within these regions. No, there's forms of Islam that are like totally whatever and unobjectionable.
Yeah.
But I think that what in the West is glossed over is those forms of Islam are not what is practiced in countries like Pakistan normatively, right? The more slave, with the government body saying, oh, you can just marry a second wife, doesn't matter what the first wife said. Oh, on grape kits, DNA doesn't count, which just normalizes, like, you should be able to do this. Oh, well, I mean, now you're forcing us to have sex outside of marriage. It's like, no, we're not forcing. Maybe stop doing it with children. My bro.
Just a thought. That's a great idea, Malcolm. Thanks for thinking of that one.
Okay. A 2018 demographic survey found that 29% of girls in Pakistan are married before the age of 18, equating to nearly 30 million women, approximately 30% of the female population.
25%? That's crazy. Could you imagine if that many women got married under the age of 18 in the US?
Hold on. It gets worse. 4% of girls and 5% of boys marry before the age of 15. 15.
What percent? Hold on. Did I hear that right?
4% of girls are marrying before the age of 15.
4%. That is
Pakistan ranks among the top 10 countries globally for the absolute number of women married before 18. UNICEF's 2018 report indicates 18% of women 20 to 24 were married before 18, 4% before 15. And in 1993, this is a big decline because it used to be nearly double that. So it used to be nearly 40%. What is interesting is Pakistan has the lowest prevalence of child marriage in South Asia after Sri Lanka, but it remains widespread, particularly in rural areas. So these numbers are low compared to other Muslim countries in this region. And then it talked about practices like Sawari or Vani, the marrying off of girls to settle disputes, which are common within some regions. The girls involved in this are as young as 5 to 9. So, and keep in mind, I wanted to, that's like, what is this? I want to know what are these practices? And keep in mind, these families, like blood, that means that like these families have a fight where like somebody was like murdered and so they're mad at these girls, right? And these girls are typically the daughters or the sisters of the person that instigated the blood dispute.
Right, of the murderer, theoretically. Yeah,
the murderer. So they are not going to be treated well by their mother-in-laws or the families they're moving into or these family networks. This is basically an S-slave. That's what's happening here. A child.
And what do they get? What does the originally aggressing family get in exchange for giving away one of their daughters? So they probably don't value that much anyway.
Settlement of the blood.
So just like, okay, now you're not allowed to kill us back.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Okay. So to go into these practices in more detail, Swara, Pashtun term meaning writing or on the back of, a practice where a girl, often a minor, is given to a rival family to settle a blood feud, typically involving murder or honor disputes. This could be like they had engaged one girl to the family and the first girl ran away because she didn't want to be forced to marry them. That would probably count within this category. This girl is married to a man from the aggrieved family to restore peace, symbolically, quote unquote, carrying the burden of reconciliation. So they put the burden of reconciliation for the entire family on a minor.
Like a literal scapegoat.
Yeah.
Just put the sin on the goat. Send the goat off.
Kid.
Wow.
Vani, Punjabi term meaning voice or speech. Similar to swara, Vani involves giving a girl in marriage to settle disputes, but it's more common in the Punjab. It can also be used to resolve financial debts or other conflicts, such as land disputes or perceived dishonor. Decision making. Disputes are often mediated by a jigra, a tribal council of male elders, or community leaders. The jigra determines the number and age of the girls given. So sometimes you have multiple girls being given from one family to another, sometimes as young as 5 to 9 years old, though marriage may be consummated later, often at puberty. So, and keep in mind, the great prophet did this. He married Aisha at 6, but he waited because he had a lot of restraint until she was 9. At least by this one interpretation, which we'll get into. I remember I was talking to Simone about this, and I was like, man, that Jesus, he, at least our prophet was not doing it with minors. Like, apparently, and you're like, that doesn't seem to be a high bar. And I'm like, well, we've got Muhammad and Joseph Smith there, apparently it's a bar that, when you get into the prophet territory, a lot of people are like, rules that you got even freaking Gandhi sleeping in the same bed with.
They just keep throwing themselves at these men. What can we say? They just want it.
Yeah. Oh,
so bad. So bad.
Anyway. Selection of girls. Girls are typically chosen from the offending family or clan, often daughters, sisters, or cousins of the person responsible for the dispute. In some cases, multiple girls are given to strengthen the reconciliation. Marriage arrangement. The girl is forcibly married to a man from the rival family, often without her consent or with the consent of her immediate family. So this is like basically determined by a local court, and a girl is taken from the family often. These marriages are legally registered in some cases, but frequently bypass age verification, exploiting weak enforcement of marriage laws. Social context. The practice is driven by poverty, illiteracy, and rigid gender norms. Families in debt or embroiled in feuds may see Sohari as Vani as a way to avoid violence or financial ruin.
But I mean, it's just like the level of dehumanization that's taking place here is extremely disturbing.
Oh, yeah. In 2023, a 7-year-old girl in Swat was given to settle a murder dispute, sparking protests by local activists. The marriage was delayed until she reached 15, but the case highlighted. So this is happening, and then people found out about it, right? But this was for a murder case, too. Like, what did she have to do with that? What an immoral religious system that would allow this. Now, note here, again, not all Muslims. This is one cultural system, and I believe that cultures have the right to self-governance, but I think that we need to be aware when we are importing people from these cultures how culturally distant they are from us, and understand that they are likely not going to understand. Like, the grooming gang phenomenon from their cultural perspective is a completely normal thing. Like, yeah. If anything, they're being extra respectful. I mean, they're waiting until these girls are like 16.
No, that's
basically hag maxing. That is what they're doing from their perspective. They're like, why are you guys mad at this? Let her walk around the house without chains some days, Anyway, in Rajanapur district, 2024, Jigra ordered 3 girls aged 9 to 13 as Vani to resolve a land dispute, but the case was overturned after intervention by a local NGO and media coverage. But this is what was normal until it's like caught. But 3 girls for land is
well, and that's, I mean, it also makes, I mean, you have to question what their home life is like anyway. I mean, basically, I'm getting this impression that parents are just kind of disappointed when they have daughters. And this is something that's reflected in the interviews I've seen with women who've been through this process, where their home life wasn't great either. Like, their parents did not value them. And, it was obviously worse at their in-laws, but like from day one, they've not been valued as humans, which is also deeply disturbing.
Well, and it's something that from my cultural background, I'm just never going to be able to emulate what it's like to think like that,
Yeah, so my problem is that I, in turn, deeply dehumanize anyone who would do that to any class of people. I don't care if it's men or women or slaves or a certain group, a religious group or an ethnic group, like whatever. Like, I see them and I'm like, okay, we're don't come close to me.
To be clear here, she is not talking about Muslims because not all Muslims treat women this way. She is talking specifically about groups, regardless of their religion, that treat women in this way. Well, I don't know, and I hear about atrocities happening in these regions, and I'm like, yeah, but aren't those the ones who like trade little girls and treat women like slaves? Like, I don't mind so much. Well, and this is one of these things where people are like,
man, that's a problem, right? Because like,
I don't think it is a problem.
I don't know. I mean, dehumanization just leads to increasingly bad stuff. I
think what it allows is for us to not meddle in their business. You know, like this is their culture. It's been their culture for 1,000 years.
I know. Like the general place where I settle in with all this is like, all right, I have to flourish. I have to win. I have to create such an amazing legacy, culture, and civilization going forward that anyone who doesn't convert into it and convert away from these bad practices would be insane, because this is just so the obvious right choice.
No, but the problem is what we're seeing is because the urban monoculture is like, oh, that's what we're doing, but they're not doing that, right? Like they're showing that when people deconvert from these groups, they stop having kids, right?
That's the problem. Yeah.
You know, if your system isn't working, and people can be like, oh, so you're a cultural relativist. I'm not at all a cultural relativist. I believe my culture is superior, but I also believe that the superiority of my culture is shown through time. It's shown through
through higher birth rates and through long-term human flourishing. The problem with the urban monoculture is it puts an end to a lot of, we'll say, human atrocities, but then it subsequently, sterilizes and kills off everyone who converts in. So it's like, oh, you have it good until we like shoot you in the head. And I
think it actually creates a secondary problem, which is it creates the perception that if you try to put the rules and social norms of our country into this region, that that these people are just going to follow them in the way that people from our cultural background follow them. And that's why they have this belief of they can just import immigrants from these regions and all of this is just going to go away. But they believe that they're going to just completely eradicate their cultural background. And one, that's a psychotic thing to believe, because you're demanding basically cultural genocide of these various genders and sexual norms. But two, it just functionally doesn't happen. You know, these people have lived alongside this for centuries. And this was something we saw with soldiers in Iraq and the common practice there of sleeping with boys, and they kept trying to stop it, and people were like, what are you doing? Like, this is normal here, right? Like, just let us have our fun, man. Like, why are you being such a stick in the mud about it? And the same way that, the soldiers may have seen the Iraqis looking at them for drinking, right? Like, I know from your cultural perspective, this is bad, but it happened to me when I was a young boy and I'm totally fine now. So let's continue the cycle. But again, I think that, the problem with, having these like absolute cultural norms is because we live in the age of the urban monoculture now, which means that the urban monoculture can define whatever it wants as abuse or an atrocity. It can define making pictures of beautiful women an atrocity. The UN's claimed to ban anime, right? It can traditional gender roles as an atrocity, even within like a Western context. It can say the idea that a person is born a gender is an atrocity, right? Like, this used to work when sane culture was the dominant culture, but we don't live in that world anymore, so we can't rely on these systems, which is why it makes more sense to fight for cultural sovereignty. And people can be like, well, what about kids? And this is why I'm like not okay with child brides, actually, at least within a Western context, is because it breaks one part of cultural sovereignty, which is to say that you can leave a cultural tradition when you're fully myelinated and mature.
Right. And if you are married when you hit 18, and you should be able to make
married off and have a bunch of kids when you're 15,
you're
right?
Not free anymore. You're not free.
You're not really free. You can't really leave at 18. You can't really make a decision at 18. Whereas with other things like, say, circumcision, I think that this is or corporal punishment, or raising your kids outside of this public school system to believe that certain things about like sexual norms are deviant that mainstream society doesn't see. All that I think is fine, right? Because none of that prevents them from leaving at 18. I also would have a strict rule against any culture that threatens to kill somebody who leaves, which a number of Islamic countries it's very normalized. But first, we're going to go into why they argue that child marriage was part of Islamic culture or religion.
Okay.
Quranic silence on minimum age. The Quran does not explicitly set forth a minimum age of marriage. Verses like Surah An-Nisa 5:6 discusses guardianship of orphans until they are mature enough for financial responsibility, which some scholars interpret as implying readiness for marriage at puberty. The CII and conservative scholars argue that since the Quran does not prohibit child marriage, it is permissive under Sharia, provided the girl has reached puberty, often defined as Menche around 9 to 15 years. A prophetic example, a key reference is the marriage of the Prophet Muhammad to Aisha, reported in Hadith. I'm not even going to try to say those words, as occurring when Aisha was 6 and consummated at 9. Conservative scholars, including the CII, cite this as a precedence allowing marriage at or before puberty. They argue that the Prophet's actions are a model for Muslims, and since 7th century Arabia accepted such marriages, they remain valid today. Puberty as readiness. Islamic jurisprudence, fiqh, across multiple schools, Hanif, Makif, Sharifa, and Hanabali traditionally links marriage eligibility to puberty, not a fixed age. For girls, puberty is often marked by menstruation, and for boys by physical maturity, e.g. ejaculation. The CII argues that setting minimum wage of 18 as Islamabad child marriage bill would contradict this flexibility, imposing a Western standard that ignores biological and cultural differences, which I would agree are there, and we do need to recognize. Parental authority. Sharia grants parents or guardians, wali, significant authority to arrange marriages for minors, especially girls, to protect family honor and economic stability. Some scholars claim this ensures girls are married into stable families before they face risks like premarital relationships. The CII has suggested that child marriage, when arranged by parents, aligns with Islamic values of chastity and family cohesion. Cultural context. In Pakistan, conservative scholars argue the child marriage is a cultural norm in rural areas. The Islamic law should accommodate local practices rather than impose universal age limits. They claim laws like in Islamabad will disrupt social harmony and criminalize traditional families. Just some notes on why this is so bad. Of the girls who do this, according to WHO in 2020, 30% die in often childbirth, and 70% are illiterate, and abuse rates are really common. So now let's go specifically to the case of Aisha, because I was like, wait, what? Like, so first, who believes? Like, what categories of Muslims believe Aisha was 12 to 19?
Okay.
Again, not okay. But in what categories believe she was 6 to 9?
Okay.
So progressive Muslims, doctors like Reza Aslan and Dr. John S. Brown, in nuanced discussions, and organizations like Muslims for Progressive Values often argue for the older age. Westernized Muslims, some traditional scholars, certain traditionalists, especially in South Asia, accept older estimates based on alternative sources, though this is extremely uncommon. Shi scholars, some Shi sources suggest Aisha was older, 10 to 14. That's not that much older, although views vary, de-emphasize her role compared to Sunni narratives. Now, for the younger age, conservative Sunni scholars...
so Shia, you mean?
What? Aisha.
Shia? You said she.
She. Is she. It's not she. Or it might be Shia. Oh, Shia. Sorry, I was reading that wrong. Shia.
Okay.
Some Shia scholars. So it's not all Shia scholars, but there are like almost all conservative Sunnis go as a 6 to 9 age. And you'll understand why in a second. It's like basically part of their religion. It's upheld in most traditional conservative Sunni institutions, including Al-Azhar, Egypt, Dara al-Mun, Daman, India, and many Saudi scholars based on the Shia Hadith. Most conservative courts and institutions, and general public in conservative regions. In rural Pakistan, where literacy is low and traditional scholarship dominates, the 6 to 9 age is rarely questioned. Now,
oh my gosh, this is so like overwhelmingly, most people are like, yeah, she was a kid.
And they're like, yeah, and he's a prophet. That's just normal. But they have a completely different view of women in these cultures, right? And I think we need to understand that you can say, okay, now do things my way, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like when people they raise dogs as like show dogs, and they're like, well, when is she old enough to, start breeding purebreds? Like, it's a very different, like, is she functionally able to? Okay, good to go. Like, I'm seeing that kind of level of logic here.
I've always found that to be a very interesting thing about consent, is they don't ask about dogs and consent when you're breeding them. Yeah. They don't ask about dogs and consent when, some cultures kill to eat them.
Yeah.
Like, Sorry, this is like
you just keep bringing it back,
because I have literally zero horse in this race, and this can only serve to hurt me. I am just trying to be logically consistent.
Well, I mean, what we're discussing though is the dehumanization of a class of human or a class of being, and so we're looking at other examples in which people manage someone else's life, an intelligent being's life. And the most common scenario in which humans are pervasively managing other intelligent beings' lives are through pet relationships, especially dog relationships.
Interestingly, I think a lot of things that are done to women in these countries would be illegal to be done to pets.
Oh no, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
So authoritarian hadith, and this is the arguments for. So now we're going to try to go through ourselves and see if we can determine what was Aisha's age, because I always try to give religions a benefit of the doubt.
Ooh, it's time for investigation.
I had just jumped on the more progressive Western thing. I was like, I usually hear it from people with like an axe to grind, so whatever, right? So
yeah, who knows if it was like normalized back then? You know how like your mother was like 39 for many years, like a decade, maybe girls are like 6 for like 16 years. I don't know.
So the most compelling evidence comes from the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, considered the most authentic collections in Sunni Islam. These explicitly state Aisha's age, providing a direct and widely accepted textual basis. Exact quote, Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet married Aisha when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old, and they remained together for 9 years until his death. Sahih Muslim, then for another quote, Ashit reported, Allah's apostate married him when I was 6 years old, and I was admitted into his house when I was 9 years old. The strengths, these hadiths are classified as shahahi, authentic, with strong chains of narration in Sa'd, making them nearly indisputable from the perspective of traditional Sunni scholarship. They are cited by major scholars like Imam Nawawi and Ibn Hajar al-Kahari as reliable in contexts like CII's rulings. Such hadiths are foundational for arguing child marriage is permissible, as they reflect the Prophet's practice, Sunnah. Consistency across multiple sources. Beyond Bukhari and Muslims, other hadith collections and biographies corroborate the 6 to 9 age, reinforcing its reliability through multiple narrators and texts. Sunni Abadwa, Ashis said, the messenger of Allah married me when I was 6 years old and consummated the marriage when I was 9 years old. Ibn Hassan, the life of Muhammad, while not explicitly stating Aisha's age, it confirms her to be young age, noting she was a young girl at the time of marriage. Strengths, the repetition of Ashith's age across multiple sources, like Abi Dawar, Timad, and Ilbar, with similar narrations from Ashi herself, suggests consensus among early narrators. Conservative scholars like those from Pakistani Hanif tradition argue such consistency outweighs speculative revisions, as the narrators were close to Ashi's time. Cultural memory. Early Muslim values precise memorization, especially of prophetic traditions. Scholars underwent rigorous training to preserve reports and narrations like Hashith ibn Uwar, and were trusted for their proximity to Aisha.
So what you're saying is you looked at the evidence hoping to find like, oh, it was fuzzy, we don't remember it really well, this is like a game of telephone, and it kept getting, and you're like, actually no, everyone's like, no, we're like really careful.
We're like really, so no, it came, so one of these traditions is directly from her own mouth. It is her account of the Prophet's life. But what I'm noting here is these traditions, they practice a strict chain of passing down information, where you were supposed to remember, like, as a religious order, word per word. And this has been studied in cultures that have oral traditions. How exactly are they passed down? And you actually see a really high degree of fidelity within oral traditions that have this value set. And you can see this fidelity respected and reflected in the fact that multiple of these hadiths that are used by different schools all have this exact same age. The speculation that she was older did not come until modern times. But then there's the other big issue here, which is early marriage was standard practice in pre-Islamic and early Islamic Arabia due to license, tribal license, and the need to reproduce. Her age aligns with those cultural norms, which is true, right? Like this would not have been a weird thing. It's more that it's a problem because of a modern context and understanding of this stuff, not because of the context at the time. Again,
if it was super normalized at the time, that makes it even harder to argue against. Like, this is just how it was done.
Right. It would be weird if
yeah, it'd be weird if he didn't do it, because that's what you just did then.
Yeah. And I mean, so to keep going here, Aisha herself was the primary narrator of the Hadith, stating her age, leading credibility to the account as a first-hand report. Her lack of objection and her later prominence as a scholar suggests the marriage was socially accepted. So she also became an important Muslim in the early days of Islam and was very open about this, apparently. I'd also note that we don't have a single Islamic scholar on record anywhere before the 19th century arguing that she was older than the 6 to 9 age. This is a completely modern argument and phenomenon.
Oh.
So how do people argue against this? Okay, so first argument. Historical records suggest Aisha was born before the Prophet's first revelation, 610 CE, making her older than 6 at the time of betrothal, 619 to 622. Her sister, Aisha's age, provides a key reference point. So Tabar's History, 9th century, volume 39, Ashma, the daughter of Abu Akra, was 10 years older than her sister Ashi. Yeah, except this is coming from the 9th century, bro. Like, that's way later. Ibn Kathir, and way later than the other sources that they're saying are too late to use as sources. Asmar died in 73, the 692 CE, at the age of 100, meaning that she was 27 to 28 during the Hijra. This implies Ashir was 17 to 18 at the time. Strengths. If Asma was 27 to 28 in 622, Ashia, being 10 years younger, would be 17 to 18, aligning with the marriage age of 15 to 19, betrothal at 12 to 15. Scholars like Malan Muhammad Ali use this to argue that Ashia was likely 15 at betrothal and 18 to 19 at consummation. The problem with this is you're arguing against a consensus in tons of religious oral traditions and written traditions based on oral traditions and like single oral and religious traditions that are shakier than them and relying on 2 chains of evidence being correct. 1, the age difference between her and her sister, and 2, her sister's age of birth, which to me seems like way weaker than the other argument chain. Next, Ashi's participation in battles like Badr 624 or Adua 625 suggests that she was physically and intellectually mature, likely in her mid-teens, as young children are not typically involved in such roles. Yes, we've never seen Islamic child soldiers. That is not a phenomenon that exists. I'm joking there because it's incredibly common. He al-Bakar, Ashi accompanied the Prophet during the Battle of Uda, carrying water for the fighters and tending to the wounded. Ibn Hassar Sira notes Ashi's presence in military campaigns, implying a level of responsibility inconsistent with a 9-year-old. That is not at all inconsistent with a 9-year-old from these regions. It's not saying she was a warrior. It said she carried water to the warriors and helped tend to the wounded. That's exactly the type of thing a 9-year-old would do in one of these regions during a war. Like, you're applying a modern cultural context onto the past. Like, this isn't even a piece of evidence. If anything, it further suggests her age being around 9.
Totally.
They're saying this suggests that she must have been 14 to 16 during this, which is what they need her to be for the 15.
The kind of like water fetching errands is total 9-year-old work, like 6 to 10-year-old work.
Yeah. Okay. So terrible argument there. Okay. Health reliability and narrative discrepancies. The Hadith states Ashi's age rely on a single narrator, Hishran Bahim Aram, who reports from later in life in Iraq, are questioned for inconsistencies. Alternative sources lack specific ages, allowing for older estimates. No direct quote disputes Hisham's narration, but Dr. Jonathan Brown in Muhammad's Legacy, page 147, notes Hishram Abba Aran's reports on Ashi's age were transcribed late in his life, and some scholars, like Malik, question their accuracy due to memory and old age. So you're basically saying your core religious texts are inaccurate, and none of the people around him noticed that he went from a 15-year-old age for one of the Prophet's wives to a 6-year-old age, or a 9-year-old concept. That seems like a big detail that other people would be like, oh yeah, I've been hearing this guy talk about this my whole life. This 9-year-old thing and this 6-year-old thing, there's like a big, let's take that out, no, nobody thought this was wrong at the time when it was being recorded, and there would have been a wide cultural memory was in this region if it was long after the prophet's death, because it was a popular religion. It's not like with Jesus where you had such a small community, and the regions in which it really started to grow were not the regions where Jesus was preaching the most. This is like way stronger direct evidence. And so I don't buy that either. I'd also note here, I find it really disingenuous that they're acting like this is just one guy who might have like misremembered stuff. This was an entire religious tradition that was dominant in that city. It wasn't one guy. The probability that they messed up that monumentally when making these transcriptions is totally unrealistic. And then there's the ethical and contextual reinterpretation that it was just unethical, but it wasn't unethical within the context. We know from Quran Surah Al-Nisa, test the orphans until they reach the age of marriage. If you find them to be mature in understanding, release their property to them. So it's basically saying as soon as they basically have an idea what this stuff is, have them start engaging in it. That doesn't require in an early Islamic or Saudi Arabian context that they be significantly older.
Well, and I would say like what this makes me think of too is similar language that we hear around various Protestant traditions in the United States, decisions around when people can be baptized, like when you're old enough to understand like your commitment to your faith. And there are many arguments that then deconverts later have, being like, oh, you weren't like, as an 8-year-old, you weren't old enough to consent to be baptized and to commit this much to the church. But like, this is something that happens not just with regard to marriage, but like, I think there are many religions who are like trying to make decisions around when kids are old enough to take responsibility for their commitments in life. Does that make sense?
I'd like to give a great example of this. When they are arguing, look, we're like biologically and culturally different from you, and people could be like, oh my God, like people of different groups can't be biologically different, and that's why one culture can apply to everyone. The urban monoculture can apply to everyone. And a great example of where this is really hurting people in the United States is Black families. So you are not told this because this is an offensive thing to mention, but Black people are biologically different from white people in a number of ways. And one that is really important to age of first birth that you may want and the spacing of your births is Black people have, specifically Black women, have a way higher infertility rate than white women, and a slightly smaller fertility window than white women. And so a lot of Black women, they put off having kids until like their mid 30s because they see their white friends getting away with this, and they're just completely boned at that point. And doctors are like, oh, nobody told you, because how could you, like, I'm not called a racist for saying this, but it's like a studied phenomenon. But you're like, well, then how does that work with Black people? How do they have the same number of kids, in an evolutionary context? And the answer is they have a shorter fertility window.
You mean they have a shorter gestation window?
Yeah, they have a shorter gestational window by about a week. And so they can space their kids quote closer together. And so this is why it makes sense to have different cultural norms for one group. Like if you actually care about that group, have different cultural norms. And this creates an interesting phenomenon that I was reading on, which is so offensive to talk about, but it is like a measurable phenomenon, which is you get developmental problems in interracial white-Black marriages where the mother is Black and the father is white, but you don't get these when the father is Black and the mother is white.
If they have shorter gestational windows, does that mean like the baby is born earlier, but then more likely to have complications?
Yeah, the baby is born earlier, but because of the white dad, part of the baby's genes expect this extra week.
A longer gestation.
So it's basically like they're born premature. But then the longer gestational window where you have the white mom and the Black dad, you don't run into these problems. I don't know if you get advantages. You probably do get some, but yeah. This is why, like, there's all sorts of harms caused to like everyone around by this fantasy of the urban monoculture that there are no differences in human populations. And like, these are people actual, like, I literally, like, I've talked with Black women and they were like furious that nobody told them about this. They're like, wait, Black women have literally twice the rate of pregnancy complications? Like, yes, literally twice the rate. Nobody told you this? Like, this is a thing that harms the Black population that this is hidden from them, like, actively.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There is this double standard because there are arguments, and I've heard arguments made by many progressive outlets that it's, really messed up that so much of medical science, modern medical science, is based on research and foundational theories that were based on researching young men.
Yeah, and then they freak out when we try to research different populations. Like, the biobanks have like been intentionally purging DNA data from ethnic minority populations and native populations at the request of wokies. You're the reason. And
then they complained about the fact that, like, you know, healthcare is not sufficiently customized to different groups. It's very frustrating. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they used to do experimentation on these groups in very unethical ways.
Well, okay, yeah, let's not go back. Let's not do that.
Let's not go back to that. Let's not go back to Tuskegee experiments.
Let's just go back to very, very open, you know, wide open samples where we get as much variety as possible, but keep track of the varieties so that we understand how there are differences that need to be accommodated.
Yeah. Well, I love you to death. Did your mind change about anything from this?
I really struggle with the drive toward cultural imperialism, with the understanding of like allowing cultural imperialism, like, you know, like just actively stealing young ladies, for example, that we think are abused, right? Like, I just want to rescue them, right? But then I don't want other cultures to steal our children from us. And we know for a fact that there are lots of people on the internet
that are online all the time. Like, I wish
actively
I could,
like, I want to get these, like, the Collins' kids taken away from them. So like, I know what it's like to be on the other end of it and to vehemently believe that we're doing what's best for our children. And then at the same time, here I am sitting on the other side of the equation being like, I want to take these kids away. They're, you know, being abused. So like, I really struggle with this, right? And I think that the only way to reconcile, and the only way I am reconciling with it now, which may not be ideal, is just like, well, we just have to provide something, a culture that's so compelling that you'd be crazy not to convert into it. And that's high fertility and that leads to long-term human flourishing, and it grows.
Cultures are not going to technologically advance, and therefore, unless they make changes, like they could make changes, and then, but if we look at current trends, it does not look as if, you know, they are outputting the latest AI systems, for example.
Yeah.
And so, you know, as technology drives a wider and wider wedge between the capabilities of cultures that are able to produce high-tech devices and cultures that are not, you know, these groups, unless some wokey puts them on a spaceship, are not going to, you know, take humanity's manifest destiny among the stars. Like, we're not going to have a DEI program for who gets on the spaceship. You know, we're choosing the best and the brightest of cultures that work the best and the brightest with other cultures, because this urban monocultural mind virus of oh, everyone is exactly the same and can easily cohabitate. Like, that's just not true. Like, some cultures, like, if you put them next to another culture, they're just going to kill them, right? Like, that's a thing. There are cultures that I could put in this region, and these people it'd be a terribly stupid thing to do. It would be like leaving a kitten around a herd of lions, right? Like, I'm responsible for that. I'm the one who put the kitten there. It reminds me of the girl who wanted to do this big bike thing to show, you know, oh, for peace, and that, you know, there's no difference between different countries and different people and everything like that. So she goes on this bike tour through Europe. She goes into a Muslim majority country, and within 10 miles of the border, they found her body raped to death, trying to bike through one of these countries as a white woman. It was just incredibly stupid, because she believed this lie that these cultures aren't different, and they are. Right? Like, their norms are different. The way they relate to morality is different. And I'm not a relativist, but I do believe that sort of within the conservative movement, we all have to fight for cultural sovereignty being the highest value, because none of us have a dominant culture right now. And the urban monoculture will use that to peel our kids from us and to restrict the ways in which we parent. And so we just have to hope that over the long run that we can be successful, that we can have lots of kids, and that we can stay engaged with technology.
Yeah. It's dark.
Dark, yeah. Love you to death, Simone. Have a great day.
I love you too.
I got the FedEx package handled at least, so that's done.
Thank you.
And we're going to try sushi correctly this time. I will come down and help you. The last time she made sushi rolls that were like larger than a silver dollar, like this big. She's like, this is what it showed in the thing. I was like, no. And it was California.
I never made sushi before. I don't look at sushi because I feel queasy when I look at it.
Being brown meant that it had gone bad.
I never use avocados in anything.
I know. I appreciate that you're trying. You are trying something new, and that is amazing, Simone. I mean, you're doing it for me.
Sometimes it just ain't good enough. Yeah, sometimes.
But now we are going to learn how to do this better with the avocados and the.
Well, and we're going to use the tiny little molds that we also very
yes
cleverly got ahead of
make
time.
Very small sushi rolls.
There's literally no way it can. You have an unnaturally large mouth, Malcolm. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay.
That's actually us having large mouths is one of the things I notice when we're around other groups. I'm like, it's an ethnic thing about like our people is that we have just like giant mouths. And sometimes I'm around other people and I'm like, God, your mouth is so tiny.
Which is not something I've ever seen before, and now I need to look for it in people.
Sorry, can you at least look at your face on the screen right now.
Yeah.
Do you not see how enormous that is?
Well, average human
face, is that what you're Googling out?
I don't know. What else do I, look at here? Okay. Okay. I mean, we're slightly above average. We're not like Aerosmith. We're not like, there's some other really impressive people. A whole baby's head in their mouth, that's really how you know. If you have who was it who ate all the babies? It wasn't Zeus. Was one of the babies who was not eaten. Kronos. Yeah, Kronos mouth. Yeah, that's how you know it's big. I'm sorry, I'm bad with names. It doesn't matter who it is, Malcolm. It's just difficult.
Mommy, I have a cake. Get me all my eggs. Mommy, I'll get all my eggs. I get all my eggs.
What's inside, Torsten?
There's candy inside. Oh, the eggs. Let's see what's inside the green one. Mommy, can you help me watch the eggs?
Yeah. Are you going to open them up, Titan?
Yeah. I'll open all my eggs, Simone.
Whoa, what was that, Torsten?
It's candy.
You're giving it to your brother?
What?
Josie, do you want to eat the candy?
I want to eat candy. I want to eat candy.
Okay, Titan wants candy too, Torsten.
I want to eat this candy. Oh. Those are beans.
They're jelly beans.
Jelly beans. I'm or jelly beans.
I think I like jelly bams more, Toasty, so we're just going to go with that.
Jelly bams?
Jelly bams.
I opened it.
Yeah, you did. What was inside?
And look.